With a debt that now exceeds $16.4 trillion, the U.S. is the seventh most indebted country in the world. Paying off that debt is a long-term issue that probably won't be solved for many years to come. A more short-term and relevant issue is the debt ceiling. According to the U.S. Treasury, a debt ceiling is the total amount of money that the U.S. government is authorized to borrow to meet its existing legal obligations. It does not authorize new spending commitments. Nearly every single time a debt ceiling is reached, though, a debate on whether or not to raise it follows. The debate pretty much goes just like that. After a December 2011 debt ceiling debate, the resulting deal left Pell Grants with a reduced eligibility to use them from 9 years to only 6 years. Summer Pell Grants were also eliminated. So if you were a student here in Cal State LA before 2011 and wanted to take summer school and graduate faster, you could have at least been covered partly with Pell Grants. The debt ceiling can and will affect most of us here. As a student who is reliant on federal aid, it is crucial that Pell Grants are not reduced further. Eliminating a debt ceiling would help to prevent further reductions. A debt ceiling is pointless and needs to be repealed. I'll be talking about how it doesn't work, then I'll be talking about the polarizing and irresponsible effects of it, and then I'll talk about the economic catastrophe that would follow if we failed to raise it. Since we wouldn't want our debt to increase to the point where it's nearly impossible to pay back, a debt limit sounds like a good idea. It would stop the government from spending too much once the limit is reached. However, according to Congressman Nather, a Democrat from New York, it doesn't restrain spending at all. I'll now explain why. The debt limit cannot possibly work the way Congress continues to spend. According to Congressman Nather, Congress is the one who decides as to what to spend, what the level of taxation will be, and what the level of spending will be. Therein lies the problem, though. Congress, according to a graph published on the Washington Post, Congress has almost always spent more money than it takes in from taxes, with the exception of only 8 years. Spending more than what Congress takes in from taxes causes deficits, which is the total amount of money that the U.S. government spends in addition or borrows to cover the total cost of spending. It's like using your entire income for an entire year, and after finding out that it's still not enough, you decide to use a credit card to pay the remaining costs. Every time there is a debt limit and a deficit, money must be borrowed, much like someone would do with a credit card, which in turn increases the federal debt. As stated in a Congressional Research Service report, co-authored by D. Andrew Austin and Minnie R. Levitt on February 7, 2013, Congress has almost always placed restrictions on the federal debt. However, the debt has still increased non-stop for decades at a time. This makes it nearly impossible to avoid raising the debt limit. The constant rise only begs the question, why do we even have a debt limit in the first place when it doesn't limit spending? After talking about how pointless the debt limit is, I'll now move on to my next point, which will be talking about the polarizing and irresponsible effects of a debt ceiling. A debt ceiling is one of the primary causes as to why our country right now is so utterly polarized and fiscally irresponsible, with Democrats on one side and Republicans on the other side. According to an article written by Joshua Green, a senior national correspondent for Bloomberg Businessweek on January 17, 2013. January 17, 2013. Congress has a two-step budget process. First, they determine exactly how much will be spent and on what. Once completed, this will mean that the spending has been established and set into law. Second, and the most problematic of all, they either vote to raise or don't raise the debt ceiling. In terms of the White House, the party out of power, by refusing to raise the debt ceiling, it makes them look good because they refuse to increase the national debt, which in turn could help them win the next election. It also says to the other party that I'm not going to work with you. But the problem with this was mentioned earlier. The spending was already established. So, according to treasurydirect.gov, the U.S. Treasury or executive branch is now legally obligated to pay for the things that the U.S. is now legally obligated to pay for the things that Congress themselves voted for. So the congressman who actually voted against the debt ceiling raise actually did was refuse to pay for the things that they themselves voted for. This would be like going to the store, grabbing something off a shelf, and then saying to the cashier, I want this, but I'm not going to pay for it. Congress is pretty much just acting like a bunch of spoiled kids. After having discussed the polarizing and irresponsible effects, I'll now move on to my next point, which is economic catastrophe. Failing to raise the debt ceiling would have catastrophic economic consequences, which will include all of us here. Contrary to what most people might believe, a debt ceiling raise will not nearly be as dramatic as failing to increase it. A failure to increase the debt ceiling would result in something that's called a government default. A government default, according to Steve Bell, a former staff director for the Senate Budget Committee, wrote that a government default is defined as failing to pay sovereign debt or any other payment obligation. Sovereign debt will just mean like government money that's owed to foreign governments and to U.S. citizens. Sovereign debt, however, is not the only area where money is owed. In a letter written by the Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner to House Speaker John Boehner on January 14, 2013, the U.S. government makes approximately 80 million separate payments per month, which include things like Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, and Pell Grants. A default would most likely stop every single one of those payments and delay them until the U.S. Treasury is able to take in more cash. But because our government keeps running deficits, that delay would become permanent, which could mean that the government as we know it would cease to function. In the words of Steve Bell, we would experience a true government shutdown. A true government shutdown. Now that I've talked about the economic catastrophe and what failing to raise it would look like, I will now, and it could also mean the end to Pell Grants, I'll now begin to conclude. A debt ceiling is simply illogical and needs to be repealed. I talked about how it doesn't work, polarizing irresponsible effects of it, and I also discussed the economic catastrophe that would arise if it failed to raise it. With House Republicans consistently using the debt ceiling as leverage since taking over the House of Representatives in 2010, the potential for a catastrophe has already begun. The potential for a potential catastrophe has already begun. The deadline for the debt ceiling raise is now May 19, 2013. However, there are congressmen and women, like the congressman I mentioned earlier, Jerry Nadler, who support and have proposed a debt ceiling elimination or a repeal. So vote for congressmen like Jerry Nadler, like him, and hopefully the debt ceiling will be gone.